Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Check the Score podcast. A bit of a different scenery, more of a solo video today. But we are looking at the UFC 314 card, which took place yesterday, going over a few of the fights, giving a few of my thoughts, and some potential matchups for each of the opponents. The first fight that I watched on the entire card was Chase Hooper versus Jim Miller, the seasoned veteran versus the hot young prospect. It was a very good matchup, in my opinion. Um, Hooper won by unanimous decision on all the judges' scorecards. Um, it was a fair result on the night, and he had one of the wildest one-liners after the match that I'd ever heard. Yeah, not much else to say there. For Chase, I'd be giving him a ranked lightweight opponent. Um, Seeing as UFC want to push this kid into the rankings a bit more. Um, I know he's not ranked, but Bobby Green is probably not a bad one. Or Grant Dawson, who's in the lower rankings of the lightweight division. And for Jim Miller, maybe retire or just one more legacy fight. Like, he doesn't need to be fighting all these hot young prospects. Just give him a good fight. And yeah, like, he fought on UFC 100, 200, and 300. Like, he's been in the company for that long. Honestly, just, yeah, I think, Jim, you've had a good run. I think that's it. The next fight was Yan Janon versus Verna Yandaroba. Honestly, a bit of a boring fight, to be honest, with a lot of it being on the ground for what was meant to be a number one contender fight. Um, I'm sorry, but yeah, Zhong Wei Li absolutely destroys either of them, to be honest. And the final prelim fight on the card was Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson. I love Dan Ige, and funnily enough, he was an outsider coming into this fight. This fight was an absolute banger, in my opinion. Dan Ige really did show up, coming in as a underdog as well. Um, I backed him despite the mismatch, even as I said, a bit of bias probably playing in there. But some people were calling it a bit of an early stoppage. Obviously, he won by TKO. Um, he took like Woodson took like six hammer fists to the side of the head. I'm sorry, but that is definitely not an early stoppage in my opinion. Um, as for potential matchups for Dan Ige, I think the UFC really owe it to him. He stepped in on like 5 hours notice against Diego Lopez last year. Um, and then he also took who else did he fight last year? Oh, it was Lerone Murphy. He fought Lerone Murphy on the Dubai card last year. So he's had some killers. Like, he's been fighting some serious fighters. I think you got to give him someone that's still in the rankings for featherweight. So maybe someone like a Josh Emmett. Yeah, like a Josh Emmett. I think that's a fair matchup for someone like Danny Gay. Um, and as for Woodson, I'm honestly not too sure. He's going to have to fight an unranked opponent. Obviously, this was his chance to go get a ranking in the featherweight division, but tonight, well, last night was not his night. First fight on the main card was Krylov versus Reyes. Honestly, this fight didn't go for anywhere near long enough to make a judgment, but what a finish from Dominic Reyes. Um, it's a finish that I feel like a lot of UFC fans has seen before. But yeah, in terms of potential opponents, probably Jan Blachowicz. I think that's a good matchup for Reyes. Two good fighters, two veterans of the sport. Jan coming off a loss to Carlos Ulberg, and Reyes obviously coming off three consecutive wins in the light heavyweight division. And Krylov, I'm not too sure. Maybe Tai Tuivasa. That'd be a bit of a fun fight. Hopefully, Tai can get a win for once. Now we're on to some serious fights. Bryce Mitchell versus Gene Silver. This was a lot of people's main event coming into it, especially within the MMA community online. This fight did live up to expectations that a lot of people had for it. And Gene Silver, like, honestly, a round of applause, a definite performance of the night bonus he deserved. He is so good for someone who's considered to be just an elite striker. His ground game really, really showed last night. Coming up against someone whose ground game is so highly regarded, like Bryce Mitchell, it was really an exquisite performance. And then he proceeded to ninja choke him to finish. And Bryce Mitchell even laid out on the canvas. He just looked like he'd just been ragdolled by Gene Silver. Um, he had three submission attempts to Bryce's zero throughout the whole fight. And then he started trying to take Mitchell to the ground, which I was a bit confused about. Um, but yeah, like on feet, completely dominated. On the ground, completely dominated. Wins by submission in round two, I think. I think it was in round two. I can't remember. It was either round two or three. But as for potential matchups for both of these guys, I think John Silver, it has to be someone like Aljamain Sterling or maybe even Lerone Murphy. I think that could be cool. An undefeated fighter coming up against someone who's really, really hot right now. Um, but yeah, seriously, if he puts in another 2 to 3 good performances in the featherweight division, I could easily see John Silver fighting for a title. And Bryce Mitchell, I'm not too sure. It probably knocks him out of the top 15 rankings in the featherweight division. So maybe he has to fight someone outside the top 15 to try and get back in that winner's circle. And the feature prelim fight for the card, the feature 3 rounder, should I say, for the card, was Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. Honestly, it was a very technical matchup. I think Pitbull may have been a little bit out of his depth going for someone like Yair. Yair's obviously had a bit of a break. His last fight being against Brian Ortega back in early stages of last year. And Pitbull obviously is his first fight in the UFC, obviously coming from Bellator, 2-time champion, 2 division champion as well. Um, but yeah, Yair landed 70 significant strike to Pitbull's 17, and I didn't expect it to be as clear cut as what the fight was. Nonetheless, it was a very, very entertaining fight, and Yair definitely deserved the decision win. For Yair, his opponent that I definitely think he should be fighting next, I'll save for later. Um, and Pitbull, I think maybe someone like Brian Ortega could be an entertaining fight. Obviously, he's only going to want big names being on the wrong side of 30. He's only probably got a few fights left in his career. So maybe a big name, an ex title challenger, someone who's always been a highly regarded featherweight like Brian Ortega. I think that would be a cool fight for him. The co-main event of the card, it was Paddy Pimblett versus Michael Chandler. And honestly, this was an absolute masterful performance from Paddy Pimblett, my personal fight of the night. Paddy really put on a show, absolutely dominated Chandler, both on the ground and on the feet. Something that not even Charles Oliveira could do last year on UFC 308. I think that was the John Jones card. Um, but Paddy landed 80 significant strikes to Chandler's 11. Like, I think that stat alone says enough. And then on the ground, even he was just as good as he was on the feet. But in round one, it was a bit standard for Chandler. Came out swinging, very hot out the gates. Probably unloaded the gas tank a little bit too much. But in round two is where things started to speed up for Paddy, landing some brutal strikes on Chandler and trying to take him down as well. And then in round three is where the message was really sent to the rest of the division that Paddy was one of the top, gonna be one of the top 5 guys soon. Um, he obviously landed that huge knee under the eye of Chandler, which really cut him and probably caused him a little bit of grief into what Paddy was going to do next, taking him down to the ground, and then it was just a ground and pound from there. And Paddy did get the job done. I think it was 3 minutes into the third round. As for potential matchups for each of these two guys, Paddy, he called out pretty much everyone under the sun after the fight, called out Justin, Dustin, Charles Oliveira. But I think the other guy that he called out, I think will be the hardest out of the 4 of them. But I think it is the fight to make and probably would be a title eliminator fight. Is a guy like Armin Sarukian. They've been going back and forth online in recent months, and I think that only adds some fuel to the fire in terms of the kind of rivalry that the two of them would have. And it would be an absolute banger. I think that could easily co-main any card. Like seriously, top 5 lightweight ranking, probably the most stacked division. Probably that or welterweight is probably the most stacked division at the moment. So anyone inside that winner circle in the top 5, I think is a definite future opponent for Paddy. As for Chandler, not too sure. He's an entertaining fight for anyone. But coming on a 3-fight losing streak, I think I'm not sure what he does next, being 38 years old. Does he retire? I think he still has some good fights left in him. But maybe someone like Renato Moicano, that could be a cool fight. Obviously, he's still in the rankings in the lightweight division. Losing to Islam at the start of the year is a bit of a like it's a bit of an unfortunate loss for someone who wasn't even meant to fight him. Got told the week of, or Connor if he finally decides to come back to the UFC. they've literally done an Ultimate Fighter and they haven't fought. So maybe that's what Dana gets on the phone to Conor McGregor and tells him to come back. Now, for the main event, this is the fight that obviously all people around the world were waiting for, but mainly a lot of Australians trying to see Volk reclaim the featherweight throne. Um, this fight might be the most nervous I've ever been for a single main event in my entire life. Um, but what a match it was. And honestly, I thought both fighters were great and they seriously, no knock on Lopez's behalf. I think he was absolutely superb on the night. I just think Volk was that cut better. It really showed that having experience in championship and 5 round fights really probably was the difference between him and Lopez. But in round one, it was really like the Volk of old. He was testing the range a bit, getting an idea of the sort of shots that Lopez was going to play out and try and land, as well as throwing that front kick to Lopez's front leg. Um, he really knew the I think he knew the last place he'd want to go with Lopez was in the clinch. So trying to keep that range with Lopez, I think, was kind of crucial in setting up setting up the future rounds in the fight. Round two, the pace really did pick up, um, but the output was really dealing damage. Volk got the knockdown on Lopez, where he hit the cage, and then we thought from then on that's kind of how the fight would progress. But no, in the last 15 seconds, of course, Lopez really does test Volk's chin. Sorry, he really tests Volk's chin and lands a huge overhand, knocked Volk down. And honestly, I think Volk was saved by the bell a little bit there. Probably all Australian and New Zealanders and Volk fans' hearts around the world sank. Obviously, we've seen it all too much in his last two fights, obviously getting knocked out by Islam and Ilia Topuria. But it was nice to know that his chin could be tested in the future rounds coming up. In round three, I had Volk winning the round with the more strikes landed. It was also the round where probably did the most damage to Lopez. We saw after the fight up close how swollen Lopez's right eye was, and I think that's where Volk kind of landed a lot of his head strikes in that third round. Round four, I gave to Lopez. I think he really did some damage to Volk throughout the round. I think it was almost as if after the third round, his corner really turned to him and said, "You really need to put your foot on the gas and try and go for the finish," because he probably was losing the round at that stage. With I had round one, two, and three to Volk, but obviously with the round two knockdown, you could easily score it for Lopez. One of the judges did. Um, but yeah, I think in round four, his team really told him to put on the gas. Obviously, being a championship round, it, it was probably the right thing to do from Lopez, and I think it paid dividends. But probably in round five was a bit of his downfall. Obviously, unloading that gas tank. Um, yeah, in round five, Volk kind of just cruised it out, put on some nice silky strikes, but um, my heart did start beating when Lopez in that fifth round was trying to call him to the center and try and get him to throw down. Um, yeah, we all know what kind of power Lopez has in his hands, and yeah, I don't think Volk is the sort of fighter that would be tempted to fall for that, much like Gaethje did to Holloway. Um, when it comes to potential matchups, I think UFC Noche in Guadalajara, I think it's pronounced. It has to be Lopez versus Yair. That's why I skipped over his matchup before. They obviously had some sort of animosity towards each other at the press conference. Um, and yeah, I think Lopez versus Yair is the fight to make. It would be an absolute banging co-main for whatever main event is put on that card. Obviously, Yair being Mexican, Lopez moving to Mexico when he was about 19. He fights out of Mexico. Um, it makes way too much sense and probably is a another shot for whoever is in the kind of the conversations for a next shot at the featherweight title. Um, and then for Volk, it has to be Movsar. He called him out after the fight. He's been calling him out even in the build up to this. He said how much he wants to take that undefeated record away from him. I think it would be an absolutely amazing fight, and surely it happens in Sydney. He's stated so often how many times he wants to defend his title in Sydney, but I think this is a chance more than ever, and probably is a fight that is probably a retirement fight. I think he's made it clear that he wants to be an active champion. So if he has a 3 or 4 month turnaround, defends a belt in Sydney against Movsar, um, I say he puts down the gloves, vacates the belt, and that'll be it. And that probably puts him down as probably a top 10 UFC fighter of all time and easily the featherweight GOAT, eclipsing that of Jose Aldo, who's obviously a legend of the sport. And that's all I had for the UFC 314 card. Tell me if you like these styles of videos. If so, I might try and do at least one of these for every single main event card. Um, or we can do a bit of a mix up from this and doing a podcast. Obviously, no guest today, a bit of a solo video, but something I wanted to try out with the new equipment. Um, thank you for everyone for listening. Yeah, up the Volk, and we'll see you next time.